Robin, like I said, I am the president of and CEO of NOAA, and 40 years in the construction and building and development, and now in the oversight business of overseeing tiny houses. I've been a tiny house dweller, tiny house builder, and now a tiny house inspection and certification company.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Lana Manderson. I am with Tiny Home Vacations. I'm kind of the oddball out. I am a resort with tiny homes. I run that resort over there in Lake Texoma, and we are a stationary, so you just get to come have fun.
Perfect. But we're going to talk about the genesis of where this resort started and where it is today. So she's, as an income producing property, she is a very valuable asset for you guys to draw information from.
Absolutely.
I'm Jeremy Killian, and I am the president and CEO of Tiny Heirloom, and I am a tiny home builder. Been around for about 8 years now. Been building for about 15, and love it. We build both RV, RVIA, NOAA certified. We also build prefab modular structures, ADUs, pretty much anything you can think of, we can build it.
And Jeremy, what is your second company?
Second company is Hope, which is a nonprofit we started. It's for basically the unhoused, and we're working with different legislators, states, and trying to help people who need affordable housing the most.
Nice.
The Hope Project, Jeremy is very humble. That what he's doing in the Hope Project is amazing. And if you get a chance to talk to him or look up on his website the how he's helping and the strategy that they have to incorporate to house the homeless across not just the United States but the world, he's top of the food chain. So, okay, so let's talk about the builds. And we're actually going to start with Laura.
Okay.
And so the resorts that you started, now I'm from Florida, so tell me exactly where Texoma is.
So Lake Texoma, we're about an hour, maybe an hour, 15 minutes away from here.
North, south, east, west?
I want to say north. I just moved to Texas, so I'm going to be honest. I just came from Georgia. So I'm still getting to know the way. But we are north from here. We're about, if anybody's familiar with Grandpappy Point, we're about less than a mile to that area. And a couple exits from Oklahoma, so it's not
okay.
Yeah, we're
okay.
literally right on the border.
Wichita Falls is going up that direction?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you started out with how many acres?
So we have 27 acres. He bought that straight out. We started with our first 4 tiny homes, and we started renting those out immediately. People just kept asking questions, what are you doing over here? I mean, tiny homes is popular. So we started with those, rented those out. I am now up to 32 units. We've been building since 2018. Of course, with COVID, we did get slowed down a little bit, but they're going up pretty quick. Our units are about 450 to 475 square feet.
Oh, wow. So they're the park model?
Yes, and they are, we do have a larger cabin, which originally was on the property when we bought it, and that sleeps about 20, but we created a 2-story out of that, so that sleeps about 12. So when you hear the word tiny, people get a little nervous,
right.
But it actually is pretty spacious compared to,
Awesome.
So,
Awesome. So what is a typical non-season night rental?
So our non-season, we do more than just tiny homes. We have forest cabins as well. Our forest cabins don't have the bathrooms, so we do those cheaper. They range about $59 a night. And then our tiny homes range between $129 to $150. And that depends on the weekday as well and the sleepers. So honestly, you're spending the same amount of money you would at a hotel to stay in a tiny home that's not, you don't have a neighbor to worry about. You go to a hotel and you hear everybody around you. This, you have a little bit more space. You have the lights at night. You feel like you're doing the camping theme just in a tiny home.
Awesome. Awesome. And Jeremy, your builds. Oh, let's introduce yourself. Oh, we did that.
Yeah, we did
The
that.
builds.
But I can do it again. I actually build for people like her. A lot of what we do is investors, people all over the country who are looking to basically get creative, especially with COVID. COVID has changed everything. People don't understand is the manufacturing is changed, supply chain has changed. Everything in the industry as a whole has changed in the last 3 years. we've all had to get creative, learn how to work together. And so being a businessman, I have to make sure that the bottom line, the ROI works, the revenue's there. And in the end, we're producing quality products. And so for us, it's learning the difference of how to appease consumers and make sure that the consumers are being treated well, and we're trying to get housing out as fast as possible. And then working with commercial customers as well, who are, like her, trying to do investments and have to stay afloat. They need product, they need it there fast. They need to have product that doesn't have issues or problems, and at the end of the day, if they do, they need to have the support. And I'll be the first to admit, we make mistakes, but at the end of the day, when you make them, you have to own them, and you got to just be there to make sure that you take care of it. And as the president and CEO, I personally have been on site to a lot of different places, whether it's either doing the installs or whether it's helping them out. On the consumer end, it's all about just fulfilling the needs, and price point's a big part of that. Financing's a big part of that. We actually have Kendall. I wasn't going to put him on blast here, but he's from Liberty Bank. He's the CEO. He's a big part of this because financing has been the hardest part of all of this. People don't understand that tiny homes are in the RV class, park model class, and what happens is that because a lender finds out they're in the tiny home class, or they may be owner occupied, meaning that you're actually living in, it's your primary dwelling, it disqualifies them to most all banks out there. And so his bank has stepped up in a big way in all 50 states, lending financing, and then it's just education, explaining that to the customers, explaining why it's important, and then meeting the criterias, and in the end, doing what we do.
So I'm going to ask you another question about the build. How many builds have you done over the last?
A lot.
Would you say over?
We average about 150 a year, so 7 years.
7 years, okay.
1,000, 1,200
Right.
houses.
I mean,
And counting.
This guy, and we will actually have a show special that we're doing, that you're giving away design plans. Am I correct?
Correct. So we're giving away 5 sets of plans for people that are purchasing and attending the show over the next 2 days at each
Right
of
here
the
in the
different
middle.
tiny house shows across the country with lovely Melanie and Haig. And we're also, as the grand prize, giving away a full, basically custom plan set, meaning that you can sit down with our designer. You don't have to build with us. It's not a requirement, although we'd like it. And that you guys can take the time to go and design your own tiny house.
And I'm actually going to throw that over to Robin to say why that's important. But I'm going to ask you one other question before I do. When you've dealt with 1,000, 2,000 people, right, in their build process. Where do they budget the most amount of money?
Well, it's kind of twofold. So the first part would be the build itself, understanding the complexity of what we all are going through now, which is obviously material costs and supplies. We have doubled or tripled in costs over the last couple of years, completely out of our control. So the build cost is a big part of it, and I wouldn't say any $1 amount because you could spread it out from the trailer all the way up to the consumables, the materials that you're using, and then obviously where are you going to park it? That's the other part. We actually own the trademark "Home is where you park it," and it's a really important trademark because people need to understand how do you park it, where do you park it, and again, it's the cost of. You either own a land and you're going to pay for the infrastructure to hook it up to utilities, or you're going to end up getting it into a park and then you're paying a management fee in respects to that. So I think it's twofold, honestly.
Okay. Does anybody want to try to narrow him down? You see, he's because I
I
have.
can give you exact costs, but we'll be here for a while.
Well, so, and what you need to understand when you talk to each one of these builders, if you ask them that question, every one of them is going to give you a different answer. But also, if you talk to a tiny house dweller, if you talk to 5 of them, it depends on their priority. Mm-hmm. But the first priority is what? Safety, right?
Fire, life, and safety.
Fire, life, and safety. So that design plan, I'm going to throw that over to Robin to talk about why the design plans are important.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that that we are really looking at requiring probably beginning August of this year. We're going to ask for our builders to give us a floor plan, an elevation plan, and a sectional of their house so that we know from the beginning what they're trying to build. We've seen people that designed their house where they had a Murphy bed that when it came down, it blocked the fire exit, at the front door. The door swings in and it can't swing in because the bed takes up that space. So design is very, very important. And there are certain things that are hard to change if you mess up on. One of the things is the trailer. If you don't get a trailer with the right size axles and frame and everything to support whatever you're going to be putting on it, and the location of the axles and things like that, that's a very important thing. So yeah, I would start out with a design, and in order to know what you like or what you want in a design, I recommend that you go somewhere, spend the night, you stay in this tiny house.
Or go to 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah,
with different floor
and see what
plans.
you like the best, and then draw your design up from that.
Until you've actually lived in it, and don't pretend like you're on vacation. Pretend like it was, Monday or Tuesday or Saturday night. You do things differently Saturday night than you do on Monday or Tuesday, right? But if you're going to live in something every day, the most important part is the flow, and what is important to you, right? And talk to us about the different kinds of units that you put in.
So we have, they sleep between 4 and 8 sleepers. Our plan is more of an open loft on a lot of them. Some of them do have rooms downstairs, their own private space. They have kitchenette, bathroom, shower, things like that. It does fit all of those in there. But yes, I do recommend before you go buy one, come stay in one. And that's what we're for. We are one of a kind. And if you come stay in one, I promise you, you're not going to want to leave. And that's what gets you into wanting to buy one eventually. So,
how many different floor plans would you say that you have out of 32 different units?
I want to say right now we have 3. We are getting to a point we are going to make stackable ones.
Oh.
So stay tuned. They will be stackable units on top of each other, forest cabins, luxury cabins. So.
Did I hear something about hammocks somewhere?
Yes, so we are in the development process as well. So like you mentioned earlier, we have investment programs as well. This is how we get our materials and things like that. We have a hammock park coming, RV park coming, zip lines, rock wall, lazy river. It's limitless in what we have going on. We have a tiny home general store is what we have there, where we press our own shirts. So it's like its own little community.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to throw this open to our beautiful audience. Would you like to learn about transportation, placement, or potty talk? Raise your hand for transportation. Placement? Potty talk?
Close.
Okay.
It is close.
It's close? Okay, we're going to do placement and then go into potty talk. Placement. So Robin has 50 states experience. I think Jeremy is coming up on that.
I've placed in all 50 states times 3, so there isn't a thing I haven't done.
So now, most of the builds that you do, would you say like 50% of them are on wheels or off wheels?
Oh, 75% are on wheels.
On wheels.
Yeah.
So we're going to address on wheels for this part. So transportation. Now, and I have to admit, so Jeremy came to our Florida event. Jeremy lives in Oregon. Florida is here. So he drove one of the tiny houses all the way through to Florida. Now, I have to admit, he was white-knuckled by the time he got there. And what do you drive?
So I drive a 3500 dually GMC, not a Ford, sorry, Texas, but it's a GMC. And it's important. 1-ton vehicles or more are usually what's required. You can get away depending on weight loads, but safety is important, and it's really important going back to the planning stage, not to jump, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
I architecturally render all of our plans in-house, but we engineer and spend tens of thousands of dollars on all of our plans. Every one of my plans are stamped and approved by an engineer. I probably spend about $5,000 a set up for each one of our plans, and that actually doesn't even get passed on to the customer. That's just because it goes back to the whole fire, life, and safety, and then driving. I've driven some of the worst conditions you would ever imagine, and yes,
How
white
much does
knuckle.
a tiny house weigh?
So the one that we have right now is about 12,500 pounds, but typical tiny houses, you're going to range in the high 10s all the way up to about 20,000, depending on the size, the footprint. You get into park models, I mean, you could get into 20, 30,000 pounds easily, and then you need full commercial loaders. I carry a Class A CDL. I don't have to because as long as it's not a weight thing, it's how you move it is what really matters. But I do enough moving, it makes it worth it. The reason I do the moving is because transportation side of it becomes so costly. When I tell somebody it's going to cost them $15,000 to move a tiny house, they literally tell me no thank you. The second part of it is insurances. A lot of people don't understand, especially when you get into other things like bank financing. We're responsible, and so we have the insurance that covers it based upon if we're driving it. Once it goes to a third party, if that third party is not insured correctly, or you hire a transport company, which a lot of us do, they hire a third party. They're basically brokering it out to bidding it. The problem is you don't have the control if that individual driver is insured correctly or not. You have to do your due diligence. You have to try to make sure that they are insured and that you actually get what's called a loss payable certificate to you and endorses it so that if something goes wrong, our insurance company can fight with theirs and then people get paid out. We've had loss mitigation where I learned the hard way about 6 years ago and somebody filed bankruptcy and we lost out and it was a complete loss. So it's on us at the end of the day. So it's important, stability of the weight ratio and low calculations, placement. Your tongue weight is really important because if you don't have that, then you do what's called the wiggle wagon, and that ends up becoming a nightmare on the road. So there's a lot involved, but it starts at architectural and engineering.
Kendall, you're on deck. This lady, lovely lady right here has a question.
I guess my biggest worry is, like, I want to travel the whole country, and to drive through, like, the Rocky Mountains and stuff with a tiny house behind you, what's that like?
Yeah.
Fun. It depends on the year. So we had to do a trip actually to Texas for the show last year. When was that? December?
You do November.
November.
We were here last
Yep.
year.
And then I went back home, and we got through the snow then just fine, the way that we went. And then I immediately had to take a house back to Jefferson, Texas. And on the way there, we hit the worst snowstorm, I think, of the century on the West Coast. I was in about 5 foot in a complete whiteout blizzard. It's all about safety. The maintenance on our vehicles are $30,000, $40,000 a year in maintenance alone, just because of how much we go through, brakes, tires, the heavy duty of the towing, sway bars, making sure that you have all of your ABCs of safety covered. Thank God I engineer my tiny houses, because if I didn't, I'll tell you guys, I've driven some tiny houses that are very sketch, and at the end of the day, it's already horrible enough when you are with your foot to the ground and you're only going like 8 miles an hour up, a 10,000 foot elevation in 5 foot of snow. And then you have a snowplow coming down and stops you, and then you have to figure out how not to go backwards, because that can happen in weight. Braking is really important. So knowing how to educate yourself, there's a lot to it. I always tell people that if they're really going to drive around the country and think that they're going to drive a tiny house around the country, they need to have a talk with me, because I could show them
So
everything.
in that kind of situation, not to interrupt you, but I am. In that kind of situation, let's define some priorities here. So if your priority is to go to like all 50 states, do you really want to drive a tiny house around, or would you like to have like a short schoolie? So Tyler Doan usually is here. He has a schoolie. He's got a 40-foot schoolie, and he's a performer. And their goal is to go to every national park in the United States. But as they're traveling, they found that 40-foot school bus can't go up some of those narrow roads. So he sold it, and he's building something smaller. But what do you think about that recommendation over driving a tiny?
Well, I think it comes down to what you can afford first and foremost, because the vehicle is as important as a tiny house, hands down. Newer vehicles, the newer Fords, the newer GMCs, the newer Chevys in a dually are safety-wise a good truck. They really are. And I've driven homes that put me into 35,000 plus pound range, which is insane because the truck only weighs 9,000 pounds. So do the math. It's more of your weight ratio on the tiny home. So if you're doing a bumper pull and you have a tiny home, whether it's 20 feet or it's 30 feet, it's all about the weight placement, and it's really in thirds. So you have to be at that 10 to 20% of your tongue weight, which means if you weigh 20,000 pounds, you're going to be right around a 2,000 pound tongue weight. If you're not, then what happens is you will feel it. If you're over tongue weight, you can definitely get into some trouble there too.
Tongue?
Floor
Can you
plan.
define tongue?
So tongue is the front where the front of the trailer is, that basically has the triangular tongue that goes onto the ball and hitch, your receiver. And so that's where, when you're buying with a tiny home company manufacturer and you're spending the money, we're buying DOT rated chassis that are custom made for the weight loads. My chassis are actually done with engineering behind them. So I actually go to Iron Eagle, I go to Trailer Made, I go to the vendors who make them, and I give them our plan set basically so that they know that the crossbars, the main support bars, everything that's been made has been done to 120% of the weight loads. That's important because of your GVW loads. So GVW is your gross vehicle weight load. So you have to look at if it's a dual axle and it's 7,000 K axles, you have 14,000 pounds. People think you can build a 14,000 pound tiny home. No.
So, Jeremy, just for sake of example, let's look at decathlons right
Yep.
there, and it's got 3 axles.
Yep.
So how much would you say?
21,000 pounds.
21,000. Do you see how that works? As you're looking at the tiny house, you can determine what the weight is based on the number of axles. But when they're making the trailer, they can change where the axles are based on the design plans. So going back to where do you spend the most amount of money on your build, depends on the design.
It does.
But these guys, and actually I want to throw this over to Robin a little, because Robin inspects DIYs as well as builders. And the education process of how do I build it, and so many people have sat here in your position and said, I bought an RV, I'm going to strip it down, and I'm going to make a tiny house on it. Robin, what do you say?
Not a good idea. No.
Why is it not a good idea?
Well, basically, RVs are a lot lighter than a tiny house is, and they'll spend so much money replacing the axles and the tires and beefing up all of the cross members and outriggers and main frame on it, that they might as well just go ahead and buy something that's built for it. Also, like Jeremy's been talking about, is if your bathroom and your kitchen and your loft are all toward the back of the tiny house in the design, obviously there's going to be a lot more weight in the back of that tiny house. So if you just go out and buy a trailer from a trailer manufacturer, he doesn't know how that weight's going to distribute on there. He needs to know or have the plans or some way so that he can move that whole axle assembly toward the back. We had one tiny house that an individual built. It wasn't a NOAA inspected and certified, but when he brought it to the shows, he had to put 40 bags of 80-pound concrete in the front so that he could have some tongue weight and wouldn't go fishtailing down the road. And that's a lot of bags to move in and out of your tiny house twice when you're doing a show. So, but here's the deal, guys. We're really talking about a tiny house that's going to move a lot. If your tiny house isn't going to move a lot, you don't need to buy a truck to move it. You can hire someone to move it, or if the manufacturer will do it for you. But most tiny houses that we see here move and then they sit. And they might move once or twice in its lifetime, but it's not a lot. In other words, like on this tiny house, I see 2 indicator lights, or there's supposed to be 3 lights in the middle of that too. But why do you have to have that if it's just going to move one time? I tell the people. It's nice that you do. But when you have a trailer mover come out, he can put those lights up there for you for the once or twice that it's going to be moved in its lifetime. But if you are going to move around a lot, like you're thinking about, I would recommend that you go the schoolie route. The schoolie is a much, I mean, obviously we're a tiny house show, and I don't want to push.
We've got a Schoolies segment coming up at 3 o'clock. Schoolies are important.
So schoolie is designed, it's a school bus. It's designed to drive on. However, like we've heard some of the panelists say that have schoolies, they bought a school bus in Florida, which is flat, and then when they tried to go up the mountains, that didn't have the engine and transmission that would pull it up and down the mountain. So that's important. And second thing is, how much do you need? A 40-foot school bus is kind of hard to park and place somewhere. Can you get by with a smaller unit? So those types of things come into play when you're talking moving around a lot. But when you're talking about a tiny house that you're going to put somewhere in a development, you're going to develop a tiny house community, or you're going to just have one for yourself or put one in the backyard, a lot of times it's go ahead and get it designed properly so that you can be towed, but realize that you may not have to tow it. You can hire someone or get the builder to move it for you that one time, and then you never have to touch it again.
Okay, I'm looking for hands. I'm looking for questions. If not, we're going to go into potty talk. Oh, do we have a question? No? Yes? Yeah? Let's do the one right behind. Okay.
In your, Miss Laura, in your community, do you have any schoolies that are there, or they just fabricated tiny homes?
So we don't have any schoolies. We are stationary. It is just a resort with tiny homes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we got a question in the back.
Thank you. My question was about trailer choice with the build, to combine your weight to consider with what you're driving as opposed to what you're building and the trailer that you choose.
Hold it up to your mic up.
The trailer choice
I heard her.
and figuring that into your build design. So you're looking at the total weight, because I hear us talking about the weight of the tiny house, but I don't hear the consideration for the weight of the trailer.
So
To combine, is that a combined weight or the weight of just?
yeah, so you have to look at your so when I talk to a customer or our salesmen talk to a customer, the first thing we ask is, what are you doing with the tiny house? What is the purpose? Because that does make a big difference. Just like they said, if you're going to move it once or twice, my mindset's thinking completely different than if you're telling me you're going to move it on a consistent basis. Then it's about what is your lifestyle. Because again, I can tell you right now, being married and having 3 little kids, I'm not going in a 24-foot tiny home. It's just not going to happen. So at the end of the day, I'm a big fan of goosenecks. Goosenecks are where you have a bottom platform and then they go up, and then an upper platform. That sits at your axle level in your bed on your truck. That pulls completely different than a bumper pull. I prefer goosenecks. You have a better turning radius. You have better pulling radius than a bumper pull. A bumper pull, you have...
All of these are bumper pulls that are here.
Every
aren't
one
they?
of these at the show. I was going to bring a gooseneck at this show, but we'll be at the next show with the gooseneck. But a bumper pull is where they're like all of these tongues that you see out here, and it's behind. And what happens is you have a 4 to 5 foot span in between the truck and the trailer. The issue is that there's licensing requirements, regulatory requirements. Most of all 50 states see it as the same way when it comes to the Department of Transportation, which is if you're using it as a RV that you are using it for yourself, then you don't have to have a CDL license. And you can be over the 26,000 combined. That's your question right there, is the combined GVW.
Is that the vehicle plus the tiny house?
The vehicle plus the tiny house. Yep.
Which the tiny house includes the trailer already.
Yep, and it includes the trailer. Because if it's like this, like Decathlon, if it's 21,000 pounds, I bet you that house, just looking at it, weighs about sub 17,000 pounds. Then you have to have your possessions and your items in there, call it 18, 19,000 pounds. Then you add in your truck. If you're, let's just say for simple math, if that was 20,000 and your truck is 9,000, you're at 29,000 pounds, you're over the GVW for commercial drivers requirements, except for if it's your personal RV. Then you can get around with the Class A or Class C license. Class A license is someone like me who's going to transport it all over the country. If it's under my license, which is for transporting one way and one way only, and it's just for the fact that I have the manufacturer certificate of origin, which is basically the title before it becomes a title, then I actually don't have to have it. But I have it because I drive well above the limits. I drive into the 30,000 plus thousand pounds. I drive 10 feet wide, 12 feet wide, oversized loads. So because of that is why I have my CDL. But it's all going to matter. The math is there, 100%. So once I get past those questions with customers, then I can educate them and say, okay, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to do it, and why you need to do it. But it is a big play on the overall build itself.
Okay.
And that's a good question, too, if I could jump in, or a good thing. He talked about 10 foot, 12 foot wide. And 8'6" is the maximum, 13'6" tall is the maximum you can, in most areas, I think 14 feet in some states. But if you're only going to move it a few times, then why not build it 10 feet wide or 12 feet wide? If you don't have to have that 8'6" requirement. It gives you a little more elbow room, a little more space in a tiny house, right?
Absolutely.
So I want to actually go back and talk about placement for 1 minute. So everybody here is, whether you're in Texas or you're going to be in other areas, it's important to know where you're going to go and what the zoning is for that particular area. So there is and if you want to write this down, the Muni Code is where you can actually find, there's two different elements that you need to find. One is the building and inspections, and the other is
Zoning.
the actual zoning boards, to see if tiny houses are legal or not, and what type of tiny houses are legal. Mm-hmm. Now, we actually belong to, and we promote a couple of different organizations that are advocates to update laws that are, there's 89,000 municipalities across the United States. If we think that they were all smart enough to come up with their own code, no, they did a cut and paste, and they all originated in the 1950s. So it takes us as advocates to get the codes updated so that they are present with the way that we want to live today, which includes having tiny houses on parcels. Robin could speak to a lot of, and every jurisdiction is different. So when you're looking at your placement, you have to look at the Muni Code, or the actual code that's in the jurisdiction that you're at. If it's not legal, you don't need to stop there. You need to ask for the code to be updated. And THIA, Tiny Home Industry Association, has an advocacy program, a webinar. There's 3 different parts. The membership's like $25, and you get access to all the resources, and they also offer support that they will actually help you get the legislation changed or ordinances updated. So THIA is important, and Muni codes are important. So I wanted to make that plug real quick. So potty talk. Does anybody? So I know that you're serious when you want to talk potties. So have you toured the tiny houses yet to see what's in there?
I haven't. I've seen a couple of them, but I've seen it. No, I haven't. I haven't really looked at them.
The what? They're standard? Well, there's a couple different kinds. How many types of do you install?
So what we do is on all of your base model units, and most all main builders do this, we do a standard toilet flange and then basically set up for a standard toilet. Reason being is most people are parking them 1 or 2 and done, is what we call it. And so that is sub 80% of what...
Is that a water flushable?
Yep.
That you're putting in just
Yep,
regular?
Just a regular dual flush standard porcelain toilet.
Okay.
Just what you'd have at your house in a regular home. The reason for that is because most people are taking advantage of the fact that they're connecting to sewer somehow, sewer or septic. So they don't have an issue of I need to be on a composting toilet, or I need to use some other way than a tank, because you can do it either way. You can basically connect to a sewer directly, or you can have an extension, a umbilical cord essentially going to a movable tank. And 80% of what we build, I think 80% of what almost everybody builds is a standard flush toilet. That again goes back to the lifestyle. If you're moving from all over the country, if you're going to be on property where, doing retaining ponds, leaching fields, septic, sewer, I mean, all of a sudden you're spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in cost. If that's something that's out of the question, then what do you use? And so a lot of people will use the separate toilets, which are basically an electric plugged toilet that is composting. And then there's...
Separate? Is that what?
Yeah, separate.
That's a brand?
Yep, it's a brand. Or they'll use what is Nature's Head, which is actually what we have in the unit that we had because it actually was set up for a dual flush sub 4 years ago. This is a consignment unit, meaning that we resold it used. And the customer that bought it needed it for this purpose because it's going to Missouri out in the middle of nowhere. So the toilet that's in there now is for full composting purposes. So it's all a matter of what the purpose is. But no matter what, on our units at least, they're all done at day one engineering with plans to have a flange. We just cover the flange, and then that way it can be retrofitted if it needs to be based on what it is. And then there's the Incinelect Toilets. The Incinelect Toilets are awesome. They've made a huge step up.
How do they work?
You push a button and then go bye-bye, and everything turns into ash, and then you just throw it away. It's 100% biodegradable.
But does it take a lot of electricity?
The original ones, yes. They did take a lot of electricity loads, and they had to be on their individual circuit breaker. Now, I think it's like about 13 amperage max when you start it, and it's about a 5-minute process. But it basically works like a really souped-up diaper genie and then an incinerator all in one. You don't really have a smell. The smells are not bad anymore. They used to be. The way they do that is by having a built-in sub-fan underneath the unit, and then you vent them correctly.
So Shorty Robbins, when we were in Tampa, was telling us about a brand new type of potty unit that's coming out that uses the methane gas to actually run.
It's a septic system, I think that some people can use. I don't know, it's not legal everywhere, but it is. You can actually use garbage, anything organic in it, and it creates methane gas that you can actually use to burn in your house for heat or for your cooking. That's more of a system rather than a toilet. But the other type of toilets that I know of, especially if you're going to be moving around a lot like an RV and you have a holding tank, would be an RV toilet. It uses a lot less water, because you don't want a lot of water in your holding tank. You have to carry your water wherever you go. And then the macerating toilet, which basically, especially if you have to go uphill from, say your septic tank is uphill from where you set your unit, you can get a macerating toilet which grinds up everything like a garbage disposal and pumps it through an 1.5-inch PVC line, and it pumps uphill to wherever your septic system might be. So those are some of the other types of toilets. Not very many of them are being used. They're specific for specific locations, but that's what I know of as far as other toilets. Question?
It's all right.
But is there not one called a dry toilet that has like those, there's silver lining in them, and then once you flush, it curls around the waist, and it's like a disposable bag sort of thing? I mean, I've seen it, but I'm not sure what I'm really talking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure about it.
There's two types between the dry flush toilets, which are what he's talking about. RV has two style of basic toilets. They're one and the same. One is like a low 0.6 gallon flush unit of water. The other one has no water. The Incinelect toilet works the same way. It's a dry flush. It's like an airplane chute. You hit the button and it opens it up, and literally, whether it's a solid or a liquid, it doesn't matter. It goes down, and that's where it goes in a silver space bag, and it vacuum seals it tight, and then it incinerates it so that it's all basically ash at the time. And then you have a little tray. You pull it out after about, I don't know, a maybe half a week's worth of use, and then you can dump it in the garbage. You can put it in the garden. It's 100% biodegradable. So you're going to spend more money for these toilets up front, several $1,000s easily. But in the end, you're not going to have the holding tank issue or the septic tank issue. So it's just a matter of, again, that lifestyle and what you're trying to do. And I'm actually a big fan on the Macerating Toilets. I love them because they're European. They are off the wall. They look like regular toilets. They're good toilets. They're expensive, but I feel like in the end it's worth it. They do, though, tend to have issues because of limited placement. You have to shoot up on these. You can't shoot down. And so they have to have a minimum of a 4-foot clearance. And when you have stud walls or main header walls, even when you're doing a loft and you have the dividing wall, you have to make sure you have enough clearance because you can't have any elbows. You can only have one elbow on those, and that's it. And that's the problem, is that it limits where the layout can fit with the toilet to make it work.
And a composting toilet is probably going to be about $1,000. And I think Nature's Head is here if you want to go check out some composting toilets, and they have some show specials too, if you would like to check out that. The only challenge that I've had, I'm from Florida, and in the state of Florida, composting toilets are legal. And so it's regulated by the state Department of Health, and they said, yeah, you can put in a composting toilet in your house, no problem, Robin. However, you still have to have a septic system. How come? Because of your kitchen. You have food waste, and that is organic, and so you still need to deal with that.
Going back to the Muni Code to find out what is legal and what's not legal in your area. That's very important. Okay, I'm going to open this up to questions. Yes.
Real quick, I just wanted to ask if it was safe to put an Incinelect toilet in a schoolie.
A what?
An Incinelect toilet inside a schoolie.
So it's all about your ventilation requirements. Anything that has a ventilation system, it doesn't matter if it's LP, if it's off-gassing, you have to make sure that you have the wall thickness. The problem with schoolies is that you have to build inward, you can't build outward. And so starting from the schoolies, we're actually doing a project for a lady. Long story, I won't get into it, but she has a schoolie, she hit some rough times, I'm donating the project to her. Long story short, 2x4 stud walls are the minimum size wall requirements you can put in anything that is under a ventilation code requirement. The issue is they usually use in like RVs or schoolies like a 1x3. They use a very thin wall so that they can maximize the interior space. So it's all about the ventilating requirement and where that ventilates to. So the answer is yes, but again, placement and key placement is the important part so that you can ventilate correctly.
Hi, I have a two-part question, kind of. With tiny homes being around as long as they have, you're seeing more of them on the market to be sold secondhand.
Hold your mic.
Sorry. Is there an opportunity to buy a tiny home secondhand, and A, have it inspected by NOAA, and B, is there any opportunity for renovations to already built tiny homes from builders?
Ooh, that's a new...
Yeah, and I can start out with that, and then you can finish. We do have a program. It's called an as-built program. We designed this program around, let's just say you put a room addition on your house without a permit. Well, what do? Well, the building inspectors will come out. They charge you a double permit fee, but they will make you take some things off the walls and inspect it, and they will give you you get the permit, and they will give you a CO for that. So we said, well, that same concept could work with what we call an as-built. If you want to remember that, it's called an as-built. It's a post-construction. It's already been built. Our inspectors may require you to take things off the walls and open up things, for life safety and fire safety. We want to see the electrical. If there's any fireplaces, we want to make sure there's 2 inches of clearance, or the clearance requirements from any combustibles and things like that. And then we are approved, if you're going to do an alteration, then we are approved by our accreditation company to do alterations and additions. So that's a possibility. I don't know if we've ever run into one where somebody actually was changing the structure of the unit itself that I know of
Jillian Wise did a couple, actually she renovated her tiny house, and she did, Jillian Wise is a YouTuber, but you can check her out, but she actually has done her own. And Jeremy, what have you found?
Yeah, so the unit we brought is actually a consignment. It's 4 years old. I actually didn't buy that, build that unit initially. I know who the good builders are in this industry, and I trust them because they have good names, and I know who they are. And I'm all about, doing the right thing. I don't have to build every unit. I'm not going to build every unit. I can't build every unit. Ultimately, if I know that it's a builder who is under the certifications of what we're building or how we're building, then what we do is, like for this unit, I drove to Bend, Oregon. That's where it was at. It was about 3 hours each way. It was a whole day. Brought it back, and then we put it on test, just like I would on a final QC when we build our own houses. And that basically lets me see every single thing mechanically with it. Does the propane work? Is there any leaks? We hold it on a water test, the whole nine. And then if it passes, what we do is we do a full inspection, inside and outside. Now, again, I can't guarantee everything. I can't guarantee every single thing is going to be done to what I would do, and I'll make sure the person who's buying it knows that. What it does serve a purpose is about 3 years ago I started realizing that with everybody out there in the market with the changing of COVID, and then the last 2 years especially, in the last year, and we went from like 4-month wait times and 6-month wait times to like 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, to now I'm hearing 18 to 26, to 24, 36 months. That people are waiting to get homes, and it's the issue of supply and demand, that I knew that the consignment side of it was going to be big and be important. And so as long as they're a certified builder, as long as I know the builder, as long as I've been able to put my own eyes on it, and I put my own eyes on every single home that we build, even our own builds, then at the end of the day, I will feel confident enough to make the statement of saying, yes, I would feel comfortable releasing the unit. Understand that it is a used unit. You are going to have the potential for issues that could happen, but ultimately, if you look at the condition of the unit, and again, I'm driving them, I'm testing them, I'm looking at all of what could go wrong and how it could go wrong, then it's an issue of just having an ethical builder telling you right from wrong at that point.
Does that answer your question?
I'll actually echo that, what they just talked about, because I finance used tiny homes. The very first thing that we would look at is the builder approved, and would it be inspected to the NOAA standards? So, great question.
Right.
And most of the issues that we see have to do with moisture.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
the biggest challenge in a tiny house.
Yep.
Either moisture inside that doesn't have any way to get out, or a roof leak, or because they don't really have overhangs, on them and things like that. So they have penetrations through the roof with skylights and things. So moisture is not your friend when it comes to tiny houses. And so if something is secondhand, that would be the first thing that I would look for. Is there any sign of any moisture issues?
Okay. Dumb, stupid question time. Y'all ready?
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. So overanalyzer that's beginning the research into the tiny home kind of world, right? If there were three things, if each of you could respond, I'd appreciate it. If there were three things that drive you insane about these people that we need to know 100% before we even come and waste your time to talk to you, right? What would they be?
So the 1:30 session that we have coming up is the Tiny House 123s on the consulting of what you need to know before you talk to a builder. But go.
Well, I would say number one, try out before you come to us. Try out a few tiny houses and see what you like. Second of all, the mistakes that I've seen in is people that are buying houses from builders that don't know really what they're doing. They're not certified or anything, and they put egress windows where they're not supposed to be, or they put an electric panel in the bathroom in a wet area or something like that. So second would be, hey, make sure that you know what you want. Second is, I would say, know what you're going to do with it. Whether you're going to live in it, whether you're going to move it around, Airbnb it, that's the second thing. I don't know. I can't think of a third thing that drives me. Nothing drives me bananas. I mean, we're here service oriented toward the customer. Do you have enough money to do the job?
One, you got to figure out where you're going to put it. Step number one, right? Because it's not, if you could buy a house, you can buy a tiny house, right?
Yeah.
So it's the toilet was my huge one, right? That was my concern. So I'm just trying to figure out what everyone's asking before I ask the same question, so I can take it to the next level and ask the better question, like an egress window or, certification.
Axles,
things like that.
and the weight.
Yeah, things
Design
like that.
specifications, engineering, yes.
I think what I would recommend is talking to a builder like Jeremy that's talked to 1,000
Thousands.
people
Thousands.
and knows the right questions to ask. That would be, and I don't think any question's a bad question. He'd rather you asked a lot of questions before you started building something.
Well, and I do have to have a plug for it. So, and there's a couple of consultants out there that can actually work with you. I think defining your goals and with your tiny house is as important as actually going through the design process and the build. Because if you're not clear as what you want to achieve, like this lady already knows she wants to go to every national park in the United States. Well, somebody else may just want to work or have it for an elderly person in there as an ADU. What's the goal? What's the end game? Or use it for income. But to know what your purpose is when you get started. And there's great consultants out there like Lindsay Wood, and there's several other, Alaska Wagoner, that they're $100, $200 that'll help you through that process. So when you go talk to Jeremy, you've already got that portfolio down, and you could just hand it over to him. So that will help you significantly in your process of your tiny house journey.
And I think to second that, it's price point, right? A lot of people that come to us, they will always have an issue with price. We have to get over that real quick and understand that you pay for what you get at the end of the day. If people think that we get rich off of building tiny homes,
No.
I'm out of here. It doesn't happen. It is a volume game for us. I'll be the first to tell you our spreads are 25 to 35% margins. It's not that big. At the end of the day, it's a volume game. So get that part and understand that price, when you're trying to compare, you have to compare apples to apples. You can't sit there and go to somebody who doesn't hold the correct certifications. I hold 9 certifications. One of my certifications is my manufacturing license. There's like less than 40 builders in the entire country who have that license. That license is $1 million bond. So to have that license, you have to be able to be compliant in all 50 states, DOT, which means that we are regulated by the federal government as well. And so with that, there's a lot of rules and regulations, i.e. why I engineer all my plans. Because if it was left to me, I would probably fail, honestly. Now knowing what I know, definitely I know how to build a tiny home, but engineers are looking for load calcs and ratios. They're looking for the fire life and safety, the type of materials that you're using, how you're using them, why you're using them, and then again, it's all about making sure that we're educating the consumers correctly. And again, that is a tough talk when you're talking to a consumer who's describing a $150,000 build with a $60,000 budget, and you have to explain to them why it's not going to work. The certifications are probably the most important thing, and that's the misconception of this industry, is that everybody thinks that it's this like DIYer versus a backyard tiny home builder versus a fully certified builder. And again, there are good builders that are DIYers that know what they're doing. They've been doing construction for a long time. Does that mean that it meets the codes and the regulations? Again, there's an education behind that, and then there's the insurance behind it, because if something, God forbid, does happen, go back to the person that needs financing, and you got to talk to the man who runs the bank and say, hey, by the way, you just lost a $100,000 asset because it's now totaled, and by the way, now we're all in $1 million plus lawsuit because someone died. You have to think about all of the ramifications, and that's where ethics comes into play. Again, I will never claim to be the cheapest builder. I'll never claim to be the quickest builder, because, again, we put a lot of R&D development into how we do what we do and why we do what we do and the materials that we use, and learning from mistakes. What I did 5 years ago, 3 years ago, yesterday, and today, I'll always learn and try to be better.
And one of the things I wanted to bring up with that, with the price part of it, and when he's talking about 6 months to 24 months out, you know, the material prices are all over the place.
Yep.
So if you want a builder to tell you a price today that he's going to build your house 18 months from now, he can't do it.
Nope.
He has no idea. He can do a cost plus, you know, or something like that. The second thing I wanted to bring out was usually when you're going to a bank, I think with like Liberty Bank, with Kendall, you need to have 20% down. Is that right? We're looking for 20% down. So when you're looking at a $100,000 house, you need $20,000 down. And then thirdly, when you're thinking about a house, don't compare it to a regular house. A tiny house is different from a regular house because in the 2,200 square foot house, you have a bathroom, you have a kitchen, you have electric, you have you have all those same things, heating and air conditioning, crammed into a small house. So think more like a yacht or a boat, you know, where you have to have all those things, a galley and a head, all in, and those things may cost more because they are specific for tiny houses. You know, a 24-inch dishwasher it can be mass produced and is a lot cheaper than when you get down to anything other than a 24-inch dishwasher. It's going to cost more money. So the square foot price of a tiny house is going to be higher than a square foot price of a big house.
Yep.
However, because it is lower square footage, it's going to be less money than a big house.
Correct.
And the end result of this is go stay in them first so that you can define truly what you want.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I get to be the fun side of it all.
She is the fun side. I get yelled
She
at.
is the fun side. And if anyone is actually looking at doing a tiny house community, we have a separate all-day conference. It's actually a 2-day conference devoted to actually defining land acquisitions, understanding entitlements, due diligence, developing pro formas, determining ROIs, assembling the whole team to actually become a developer, and doing a whole business plan. It is in Colorado Springs. It's May 12th. The optional 13th is, and they're priced separately, the 13th is a half-day program where you are actually pitching your business plan, you are learning your elevator speech, and we're doing a Shark Take with real investors. Yeah. So that is in Colorado Springs. The room, it's at Norris Penrose Center, and the room that we're in is called the Heritage Room, and there's floor-to-ceiling windows, and you're looking up at Pikes Peak the whole time. So it's a really cool place. You're going to totally disconnect until we focus on becoming a developer.
And there's a limited number.
Yeah, it's only 125 people is the maximum we can do.
So.
And when you pick up the program, these are the shows that we're doing for the rest of the year. We've added in Salt Lake City. We're going to be in Colorado Springs, LA, Salt Lake City, let's see, what is it, South Florida, West Palm Beach, and Richmond, Virginia. So I want to thank you all for coming. Can I hear a round of applause for our panelists? Please get to know them, give them your contact information, and stay in touch. And we want you to go tiny. We want to support you every way we can.
You guys have been a great audience.
Thank you.
Tiny Heirloom.